No, that's not. It's scheduled right now. It just popped open. So everybody's signing in right now. So yeah. 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 No, you're signed in right now too. So. Bye.
Hello?
Hello there. You're on.
Oh, okay. I can't see myself, so I'm not sure. Am I in the screen?
Yes, you are. Let me make you co-host.
Okay.
There you go. Then you have the controls.
Okay. That does for me, but all right. I do you know the age of the kids? I can't see anybody, so
The age of the kids is 4th through 6th grade.
Right.
okay. Great. I don't know if there's one of the adults we would be willing to, like, if there's questions, they could put them in the chat. Maybe somebody could pull them out.
Okay.
That would be very helpful.
If they do that, I'll monitor those. So.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So
be able to make her screen bigger. All I have is the big sign with the Microsoft Word document on it.
Hold on.
there we go.
And then let me get.
Thank you. That's great.
Yep.
The same is for done also.
You were muted. I don't think we heard you.
No, I have.
Oh, did you?
All right. I can get started. My name is Kelly, and I'm here at the Raptors Center. And I understand you want to hear a little bit about birds here today. And at the Raptor Center, we do a few things. We usually like to talk a little bit about what we do here at the Raptor Center. We'll talk about what raptors are. I understand if you're studying birds. And then we'll see some live birds. We'll get them out for you. So here at the Raptor Center, one of the main things we're known for is a hospital for raptors. People can call us if they find one that's sick or hurt. We take it in, we try to rehabilitate it, fix what's wrong with it, put it out into the wild. So in recent years, we've seen usually around 1,000 birds a year here at the center. The birds that you'll see in this program are birds that can't go back to the wild again. And I can kind of talk about the things that happen to them, but just know there's something that will keep them from surviving in the wild. And that's why they're here at the center. And we choose birds that can handle this kind of an environment. So you'll see some species here, and you'll see certain individuals will make it here, but others, this wouldn't be a good setting for them. So we wouldn't keep birds like that here at the Raptor Center. But we do some other things. We have to do education like this. We train avian veterinarians. So veterinarians in the past have come from all around the world here to the center to learn how to take care of birds like we do. And then we also teach workshops here, and we do research. So we help study the birds to kind of figure out how to get them surviving better in the wild and kind of figure out those issues that are getting in their way. So when we're talking about raptors, obviously they're birds, but eagles, hawks, falcons, and owls are the main ones that we have. And I'm going to actually get out our first guest here. But eagles, hawks, falcons, and owls are the main types of raptors that we see. All right. This is Rowan. Start out talking about her. But the eagles, hawks, falcons, and owls. And then we also do treat vultures here. Vultures are a little bit different. I'll mention why. But the tools that they use when they're hunting, they eat only other animals. So they're not eating things like fruits or vegetables. They're not eating any grains or anything like that. No grass, no leaves, just animals. So Some of them eat a huge variety of animals. Some would call that a generalist, and some will eat more specific types of animals. And we can talk about for each bird what kind of food that they're looking for out there. But their way of hunting is to use their eyesight. Let's see if I can get this bird a little bit closer. You can see that big eye right there. This bird, I'll mention, if she turns the other way, you can catch it, but she has one big eye. And then on the other side, she has a really little eye. But generally raptors are using, there's that little eye. And that is the thing that's kept her at the Raptor Center. She's right eye. So they use their eyes to find the food that they're trying to locate, looking for other animals. They have really good eyesight. They use their feet with talons on it. You see that talons on this bird, those big black nails. Their feet are very strong, and they're using their feet to grab their prey. And that makes them different than other birds that eat meat. Things like crows, for example, great blue herons, even like robins eat worms, things like that. There are other birds that eat meat that aren't raptors, but raptors have these talons that they use to grab their food. And on top of that, they have a curved beak. So good eyesight for finding food, feet for grabbing it, and that curved beak is really good for tearing it up. So you'll find all three of those tools on all of the birds, and then within each different group, there are some adaptations that are a little bit different that we'll talk about. But just know that in all raptors, those are very common. They eat other animals. Vultures, on the other hand, we do treat them here, but they're not going to grab anything with their feet. Vultures' feet are better for walking than for grabbing onto stuff. And so they're actually a scavenger. They're not looking for anything that's live to catch it, which makes them a little bit different. This bird here, this is Rowan, I mentioned, and Rowan is a red-tailed hawk. So take a peek at the tail. And you can see it's not really red, right? It's kind of a reddish brown. Red-tailed hawks are very common in Minnesota. I'm gonna see if I can stand a little bit closer so you're looking more at me. But red-tailed hawks are very common here. In Minnesota, there should be in Iowa as well. She's staring at herself on the screen. It's kind of cute. You'll find them in a wide variety of neighborhoods and areas where there are fields. So they're really very common out there. In their first year of life, they don't have that rusty red tail. So they look just a little different, but otherwise you can see this kind of brown on the side and the back, sort of a ivory color on the front with that belly band across the bottom, which can vary a little bit. And then really pretty yellow feet. And she's a pretty typical color for a red-tailed hawk. So I'm gonna back up a little bit. Oh, she's stretching. Oh, just give her a little more space. All right, so I always like to ask people if they think this is male or female. And it's hard to do that kind of interaction in sort of a setting, but it is good to think about how do we tell the difference between boys and girls in raptors. And of the 4 birds that I'm gonna show you today, only one of them has a male and a female, a boy and a girl. That's a different color. And that's not this one. Red-tailed hawks, male and female, boys and girls, they look pretty similar. There isn't going to be a huge difference, but we can look at how big they are. And in raptors, females are larger than males. This is a pretty good size for a red-tailed hawk. So our guess would be that this is female. And we don't really need to know that to take care of them here. So we take a guess at it, and that's close enough. We don't have to worry about that so much. But what does she weigh? Well, birds have to be light to fly. So if you think about like a cat this size would weigh a lot more, a mammal would be a lot heavier than a bird. This bird, she typically weighs maybe about 3 to 3.5 pounds, depending on the time of the year. They like to be a little heavier in the winter, a little bit lighter in the summer. But that extra weight in the winter can help them survive the cold a little bit better. So her favorite way to hunt for a red-tailed hawk would be to stand up on something tall, so like up on a tree branch or up on a light pole that's next to a freeway. Use her eyes to look around for something she wants to go after. And then when she sees it, then she'll fly down and grab it with her feet. They don't want to waste a lot of energy flying around trying to look for something that they would want to go after. They want to conserve energy, stand still, wait until they see something, and then go after it. So it's kind of perch hunting or ambush hunting, as sometimes people think of it as. But they're all about conserving energy in that way. And the same thing for how they fly. Their typical flight is called soaring. And to do that, her wings are really big and wide. She's about 2 feet tall, but her wings are 4 feet across. So she can use those really big wide wings, hold them straight out, and the air will just push her up into the sky. So she's looking for pockets of warm air that are rising called thermals. So if you have a sunny day and the sun is shining on the earth, the places that are warmer, darker get warmer. And oops, we're gonna go to the bathroom. Nice. Those darker areas get warmer, and then that warm air will rise up, and they're really experts at being able to find those pockets of warm air and ride them up into the sky. All right. Those are kind of the best places to look for them, kind of on a tree by a field. They tend to be kind of an edge bird. They want to be kind of near some trees to stand in, but an open area to hunt. But also if you look at the light poles next to the freeways, a lot of times you'll see them up there. Nice big tall thing that's just like a tree, big open area by the freeway. A lot of times there's mice running around in the side of the road. And so these birds have figured out that's a really great place to live. It's really easy to find food. That's what life is all about, right? It's trying to find food. But the bad thing is we do get a lot of birds that get hit by cars. It's one of our most common injuries here at the center. So we're going to put her away. She's starting to get a little bit fidgety. But I want to challenge you to look. You can see how dark she is, and she blend in nicely on a tree. But when she opens her wings, you'll see underneath it, she's very white. And so when she's flying, it's actually a little bit hard to see her because she blend into the sky a little bit. Rowan's reason for being here, as I mentioned, oops, I'm just going to I'd actually give her this little chunk, see if she'll tear it up. But Rowan's reason for being here is that blind eye, that really little eye. It's called microphthalmia, and she could have either been hatched that way with that tiny little eye, or it's possible that she got smacked by her eye when she was in the nest, and then the eye stopped developing. But it's hard for them to hunt as a youngster when they only have one eye that works. Because not only can they not, oops, now we're gonna chug it, nope. Not only can they not see like half of the stuff that's available out there for them to see, but you need two eyes for depth perception. So to tell how far away things are. So if she's standing up on a tree and she can only see out of one eye, it would be hard for her to be able to figure out where that mouse is. She might not be right about where it is, and then they usually miss it. So most of the time, young birds that go blind and haven't really learned how to live in the wild would starve because they wouldn't be able to find enough to eat. But you can see how she's eating. She's holding the food down with her feet. Feet are kind of like a fork, and that beak is sharp like a knife. So she can use that to rip off pieces. And often they'll rip off a piece, and they might look around, and then they'll rip off, just make sure everything's safe, because they can't really see anything when their head is down. So she'll rip, oops, she just squeaked. She'll rip off a piece, and then she'll pick her head up and look, and then she'll rip off another piece. Today she's having rat. So in the wild, they eat a lot of things on the ground. So mice and squirrels and rabbits and maybe some snakes. All right, I'm gonna put her back with that. And I don't know if there are any questions. All right.
I don't see any questions yet.
So this next bird that I bring out probably should look pretty familiar as well. Red-tailed hawks are very common. This is also fairly common. And these birds we often find more by sound than by sight. See if he's ready. Right. So this is Bubo, the great horned owl. And as I mentioned, great horned owls are very common here in Minnesota. There are up to, I'm just gonna give him a little treat for coming out. Oh, tail slurp. Just flick me with it a little bit. But in Minnesota, we can see up to potentially like 10 species of owls here. In this part of the metro area, we see a lot of great horns, barred owls, eastern screech owls. I would think Iowa probably pretty similar, although you might have a potential to see barn owls, but you may not see some of the northern or western birds that we get here. So the numbers could be a little bit different in where you are, but great horned owls are pretty common throughout much of North America. And we always think of the owls as hunting at nighttime or being nocturnal. And this owl, often I really think of it as being crepuscular. So they're more active at sunrise and sunset. And that's what crepuscular means, just more active when the sun is going up and down. So not necessarily late at night. Let's see if he'll look. He's too busy looking at the food pouch. See if he'll look in the other direction. So one of the things that I noticed, so when we think about owls, their adaptations are very different because of when they hunt. And if we can get him to look forward a little bit. Okay. Over here, there we go. You'll notice how big his eyes are. Look at those big eyes. So big eyes will let in a lot of light. The pupil in the middle can get huge and just let in tremendous amounts of light. They can see in a very small amount of light. They also have a lot of rods on their retina instead of cones. And that's the area in the back of your eye. And rods are good for low light vision. Cones are good for color. So he has really good low light vision, but his color vision is probably pretty limited. I can do something with my eyes though that this owl can't do. And I can look up and down and right and left, and I can make circles with my eyes. But if you watch him, his eyes are really stuck right in one spot. So to look around, he needs to turn his head. And a lot of times people think, oh, they can go all the way around in a circle, but you kind of have to think about like the perspective of where they start from. So most people, if you start with your head in the front, which is your natural head position, most people can kind of look over a shoulder, and that's how far you go. This owl can look over its shoulder, behind itself, and then over its second shoulder. So it can go 270 degrees, 3/4 of the way around in one direction. And of course it can do that in both directions.
Sorry, excuse me. The question is, first one, I'll go with the owl here. Will owls eat other raptors? And then the other questions were, how do blind hawks hunt? And how long have you had Rowan?
Okay. Yeah, so owls will, these owls will sometimes go after other raptors, generally things that are smaller. So sometimes small owls can be prey for things, or like some of the small falcons can be. More often than not, of course, they want to hunt things that are less dangerous. But certainly some of those smaller raptors will be cavity nesters. So they'll like nest in a hole in a tree just to stay a little bit safer. And then the question about Rowan. So an owl, a hawk that's blind in one eye would have trouble hunting. I mean, obviously, if they're completely blind, a hawk is going to have a really hard time because they're not utilizing hearing like an owl might do. Rowan has been here, I think it's like 7 or 8 years. I'd have to look and make sure, but somewhere around that, maybe about 8 years. She's probably about 8 years old. She came in her first year of life. Now, sometimes we will get a bird in that has gone blind, but we know that it's older. Like maybe it's been blind for a couple of years. They could tell it isn't a fresh injury. And if the bird has been surviving, then it may go out to the wild.
Is this a boy or a male or a female owl?
Yeah, so one of the tricky things is Bubo, we think is probably male. He's a bit smaller than some of our other birds. Great horns there isn't just quite a huge disparity. And so sometimes it's a little bit harder to tell. But our thought is that this is probably male. He's not a particularly big great horned owl. He weighs probably like 2 3/4 pounds. So he looks really fluffy. And so a lot of times people might think he looks about the same size as that red tail, but he underneath all of these feathers, he's really pretty tiny.
What owls do you have? How do birds clean themselves? And what is the most common bird at the center?
Owls clean common. Okay, so we have here great horns, barred owls, eastern screech owls, northern saw-whet owls. So we have probably 4 different species here at the Raptor Center. We had a barn owl for a while, but she's gone now. So that's those. They clean themselves, so they like to take baths. And so when the weather is warm enough, we provide them with water pans, and they tend to get in it. It's very important for them. You know how you wash your fingers and you wipe off your mouth after you eat. A lot of the birds will like to clean themselves off after they've had something to eat because it's important to keep their feathers in good shape. They will also preen themselves. So just like we comb our hair, they can use their beak to run it along their feathers and like rehook them and put them in good condition. And so it is really important for them to take care of their feathers. In addition to that, sometimes they can pick up things out in the wild. So often they'll stand in the sun, and that might kill anything that's like sitting on their feathers. And they also do something called rousing, which is they shake up all their feathers and they shake them all down. And potentially maybe somebody might do that during the program here. But that's one of the things that does is it dislodges loose feathers, and it also will sometimes put out a cloud of dust. I mean, it'll help shake off all that stuff that's on them. And then the most common, we probably have like 4 bald eagles, we have 5 great horned owls, we have like 5 red-tailed hawks. So we have kind of some of the classics. Those are the ones that we have the most of here at the center.
How long can owls live?
Hmm.
Why can't this owl go back into the wild? And
Okay.
what is the biggest bird and the rarest bird?
Oh my gosh, I'm not gonna remember all those.
I'll come back again. So
Okay, so I know one thing was, why can't he go back to the wild? And a bubo here is what we call a human imprint. So somebody found him when he was little, and he was a cute, fluffy little owl, and probably down on the ground. And the people that found him wanted to help. They picked him up and they took him home. So very bad idea. For one thing, that's against the law. These birds are all protected by law, just like all native species are, except for birds that you can hunt. So having them at your house, watching TV with you after school, it can get you into some trouble. The other thing is, he really needed to be around his parents when he was little. He didn't learn how to be a great horned owl out in the wild. And you can hear sometimes him making a bunch of little chittery sounds. I don't know if he's doing it right now, but he really shouldn't do that around people. He sort of sometimes acts a little bit like a baby owl when he's around humans. And people fed him when he was young. And so when he gets hungry, he thinks that food comes from people. And so the odds of him ever hunting in the wild would be pretty low. It's very likely that he would starve. Let's see, I forgot what the first one was.
the first one is, how long can owls live?
Oh, how long can they live? So bigger birds live longer. This type of owl would live to be maybe 15 to 18 in the wild. Smaller owls, only 7 or 8 years potentially. So something like an eastern screech owl might not live a particularly long time. Here at the center, with people taking care of them, they can actually live quite a bit longer. So maybe double their lifespan. Bubo here is already 23 years old, somewhere around there. And should be fairly physically healthy because his reason for being here is a mental injury and not a physical injury. So he could live quite a long time here at the center.
What's the most rare bird? Or did you already answer that one?
The most rare one here or
Yes, at the center? Yeah.
At the center? Oh, we tend to not have really rare, but well, we have vulture here, who's pretty cool, and they're not particularly common in education. I mean, you do see a fair amount of them in the wild, but most of the bird species that we have in education are actually the more common birds. So I don't think any of them are particularly rare. Peregrine falcons, I guess peregrine falcons probably would be the ones that we have the fewest of in the wild. And we have 2 peregrine falcons here.
Okay, and then one just disappeared here.
Thank you for fielding these.
Oh, you're welcome. It's gone there. One was there, but you answered it several people's. Oh, how many different types of owls are there?
Yeah, so in Iowa, I'm not completely sure. In Minnesota, I usually say like 10 or 11 species. But throughout the world, I mean, there's hundreds. So it's hard to know. I would guess in Iowa that you probably would have a similar number, except you wouldn't have like a couple of, like I said, the northern and western species. So you may have like 8 or 9 at least. But don't quote me on that. I'd have to look because I didn't think to look in there. And this bird's name is Bubo. He's named from his scientific name, Bubo virginianus. You know, all the living things were given a name in Latin that people can't really pronounce, but theirs is actually pretty easy. His is really easy to remember. Now, he doesn't know his name. We name all of our birds because we have a lot of birds here, like 20 some birds, close to 30. And that makes it really hard for us to keep track of them if we don't give them names. So his name is Bubo. So I mentioned those big eyes and that flexible neck. He can turn his head really far. He also has really good hearing. And these things kind of look like ears at the top of his head, but those are really just feather tufts. They don't necessarily have anything to do with hearing. You can even blow them around a little bit. His ears are actually, you see that really dark line on the side of his face like that. His ears are right there, kind of back behind his eye, just like where our ears are. But his ear goes from the top of his head to the bottom of his head. It's a really big opening. It's so big that if you peel open his ear, you can actually see the back of his eye inside of his ear. It's a really big ear opening. One points up and one points down. And that enables him to not only tell when sounds are right or left, because he has a right ear and a left ear, but he can tell if sounds are up or down. And so he can turn his head until he gets the same sound in both ears. And that means he's looking directly wherever the sound came from. And that means he doesn't even have to see prey to catch it. There can be a mouse running under potentially like a foot of snow, and they could just jump right into the snow and grab it and not even see it. So they've got it in their talons. So it's pretty amazing that they can do that. It's kind of scary to be in the wild when you're thinking about that. He doesn't have an ear flap like we do. You can see that curved area of feathers on his face, though. It's called a facial disc. And that's how a lot of times how people recognize owls, by that facial disc that will actually send sound towards their ears. So it helps their hearing. And one last thing I want to mention, and I can take some more questions too, is that they rely on silent flight. So just like that red-tailed hawk likes to soar, this one has a different type of flight. He wants to be very slow and quiet. And that's partly so one, he can sneak up on prey. He's out when it's darker outside. If he was flapping and making a lot of noise, all the mice would hide and he wouldn't be able to find anybody. And the other thing is that he likes to use his hearing to hunt. Sorry, his hearing is being pretty. He knows I'm reaching for food. And if he made a lot of noise, he wouldn't be able to hear anything while he's hunting. So they have very soft feathers. Their body's very fluffy. His skull is actually pretty tiny underneath there. And the edge of his feathers are really frayed. So they go through the air quieter. So the edge of his feathers looks kind of like eyelashes.
2 questions. How many birds are you able to return to the wild versus those you have to keep at the center?
Okay, so one of the they do statistics kind of interesting in a rehab setting. And so one of the things that there's a chunk of birds they can't even treat. So they don't really count those. When we release, of the birds that we treat, we release like 50% to the wild, which is actually a very high stat for rehab. And then we keep some here. We can't keep all of them. We also do place them in other places. And then there are some species that wouldn't do well in a captive setting. So we wouldn't place them anywhere at all.
Kelly, how far away can owls hear, and what is the longest wingspan?
So I don't know if anybody has this exact statistic about how far owls can hear. I know for one of the things I've heard is that they can hear your heart beating when they're not near you. And I'd be interested to see if anybody, if that's a completely true stat, but I don't know the exact specifics. But you know, they're generally, they're not looking for something that's like a mile away or anything like that. They're looking for something that they can pounce on. So they can hear really well, but I'm assuming that they would be looking for something kind of in their vicinity because they need to be able to fly down and grab it.
Which bird has been at the center the longest?
Boy, that's a good one because it used to be our vulture, but he's gone now. So I would think one of our eagles has been here like 27 years, I think, somewhere around there.
How long can owls fly at one time?
And I don't know if anybody's tested that because they typically don't fly very far. They're not a migratory bird, so they're not looking to fly distances. They tend to stick around in the wintertime, and they're going to fly from here to there to catch things or to go across their territory. So I don't know that anybody has a stat that says exactly how far they could fly at once. They just typically don't do it. One thing I want to do is I want to feed Bubo a mouse. And you did get to see the red tail eat a little bit. You saw him eat that little rat piece earlier, but I've got a mouse for him and it's dead. But it's kind of interesting to see them swallow it. If they have prey that's large, they have to tear it up to get it down. But not unlike us where we have to chew our food to digest it, they don't have to. So here it comes. It's pretty quick. But you can see how big that his mouth is actually a lot bigger than you might guess. It basically goes from the middle of one eye to the other one. So it's really very wide, and he didn't need this. Really easy for him to swallow that. He could swallow something larger if he wanted to. All right.
What's the youngest bird that has come into the center, and where do different owls live?
What's the youngest bird that came into the center?
Yes.
A chunk of, we've had a few of them that have come in as probably fluffy downy things. So like Bubo was probably one of the youngest that came here when he came here because he was probably still, he probably hadn't even fledged or was flying or anything like that. And oh shoot, what was the other, where do different owls live? So a lot of owls will live in, you know, like mix of like wooded areas or open areas or neighborhoods and parks. So great horned owls we see in a lot of different places. There are some that are a little more specific to types of trees, like northern saw-whet owls, like certain types of trees a little bit better. And then like barred owls, a lot of times we'll see by water. I remember camping once and I could hear a barred owl across the lake. So they're one of the few owls that will take fish. So sometimes them we'll find in a little bit different places. But a lot of them, it's sort of like kind of wooded areas, places that are a little bit open, but not stark open.
Kelly, I've got quite a few questions rolling in.
Okay.
Excuse me. Have you ever had the parent of one of your birds show up at the center?
Well, we probably wouldn't know.
That's okay. What is the most sick bird you have had at the center?
In the clinic or in education? I guess, I mean, if I'm thinking about the birds that come into the clinic, some of the most sick birds that we get are birds that get some sort of poison. So either they ate something that had lead in it. So if you do any hunting, you know, if you use a rifle, we tell people to stay away from lead because it's very toxic. And then eagles will eat like gut piles and they'll eat, they'll scavenge, they'll eat dead stuff out in the wild. And so they get that lead in them and it makes it's really awful to see them. They have trouble breathing, they can't stand. But other birds that have gotten pesticides and things like some organophosphates. And then we recently had some eagles that came in that had gotten mistakenly found some animals that had been euthanized and had euthanasia solution in them. And those are some of the worst things to see because they look just so sick.
Do owls fight over territory?
They can, yeah. They definitely can. Now, I mean, there is a lot of, one of the things about great horns, let me get out this next bird. One of the things about great horns, there's a lot of places they can live. And so we don't really know exactly how many territorial fights there are. Oops.
What is the rarest owl?
Ooh. I think in the United States, there are probably, in the United States, there's probably some that are like endangered or threatened. So we're seeing like some, like boreal owls can sometimes deal with habitat loss. And then one of the ones that I hear about a lot is spotted owls. We have barred owls here in the eastern half of the United States that have kind of like gone up through Canada and come down on the West Coast. And so in addition to losing habitat, spotted owls are also dealing with barred owls coming into their spaces. And so they're one of the ones that we're worried about because of that invasion that they're dealing with.
What was what was the first bird at the center? And what is the biggest bird you can have?
So the first bird that I've heard about, so the reason the Raptor Center started is that somebody found some owls that needed help, some baby owls. I think they were great horned owls, and there wasn't anybody to deal with them. And so Dr. Rettig and Dr. Dubuque took them in and figured out how to take care of them, and then started the Raptor Center. So those would have been the first patients that they dealt with. You see him bobbing his head. It's very cute. And then the biggest one. So most of the time, you know, most of the time we see, you know, bald eagles, golden eagles. We have once treated a California condor, which is very large. It has like a 9-foot wingspan, very big. And they could never really, I mean, they couldn't have only one person holding onto that bird. It was so big that when they needed to treat it in the clinic, they had to have 2 people hold it. Because it weighed like 18 pounds and it had a 9-foot wingspan. So, all right. So
What bird have you seen the most?
we see a lot of, it kind of varies from year to year, but we see a lot of great horned owls, red-tailed hawks, and then also bald eagles. So, and it kind of varies from year to year. And then sometimes we see a lot of Cooper's hawks. It kind of varies a little bit.
So I've got 2 more and then we'll let you go into this bird here. Say, are the birds able to have babies and do they ever try to kill each other?
It's quite the disparity in the questions. Okay, we don't do any breeding here at the Raptor Center. We don't have a permit that allows us to breed them, so they don't do any breeding except for times where we've participated in a special breeding project, which was the peregrine falcon restoration. And they don't try; they're housed separately because these birds are all territorial. So we couldn't put this bird in with that like red-tailed hawk. That would be disastrous. So we do have to house them separately to make sure that they won't hurt each other because they are wild animals and they want to protect their space and they would not tolerate generally another bird being in their space. All right. So this, you see the head bobbing and the tail pumping. This is called an American kestrel. And a lot of times people think this is a baby because it's so tiny. He's just a little guy, but he's not. This is full grown. See if I get him a little closer so you can see him up close. Look at that bumping, the bobbing. And that's actually one of the ways to recognize them in the wild. So American kestrels are the smallest falcon found in North America. And a lot of times when I've seen them, I live in a suburb of Minneapolis, and I've actually heard them in my neighborhood and seen them flying overhead. And so that's one of the ways to find them is if you play the sound for them, you can really recognize that sound, and then you know you've got one around you. But the other thing is this bobbing head, pumping tail thing. When I've seen them typically out of the city a little ways, they're standing like on a telephone wire next to a field. And they're usually alone because falcons are bird eaters. They eat a lot of small birds. So no birds want to sit next to a falcon on a telephone wire, but they tend to bob their head and pump their tail. And so it's actually one of the easiest ways to recognize him, because otherwise he's like songbird size. It makes it a little bit harder to recognize them in the wild. So I'm going to give him also like a little chunk of food to eat. Yeah. Hopefully this is okay. Oops. Wow. Pretty excited about that. It just gives them this is how we train them. They're trained with food. And so this is a reward for him to be able to eat on the glove when he's standing here. You can see how he's going to might rip off some feathers because they eat a lot of birds. This is a chunk of quail, which is a type of bird, not necessarily a type of bird they would catch in the wild, but we can't exactly match their diet. But you can see how he's going to take a little piece off, and then he'll allow times to look around. Falcons tend to be bird eaters, but they will also, this American kestrel will also eat things like small mice, and they'll eat large insects like dragonflies and grasshoppers. But they're trying to catch things with their feet, just like the other birds. He only weighs about as much as a stick of butter, or like a nice size hamburger patty. That's all he weighs, like 1/4 pound. And he might actually be a little bit lighter than that. He's one of our smallest birds, but he still has those tools that raptors have. He has good eyesight. He has feet with talons. They're just little bitty talons, and he has that curved beak that you can see is really good for tearing things up. Please watch him rip off chunks off of this. So this is the one bird of the ones that I'm going to show you today, where the male and female, the boy and girl, are a different color. And this is a boy. You can see he's actually a fairly flashy color for a raptor. He's kind of almost a blue-gray on the wing, and he's kind of a rusty color on the back and on the breast. And that's actually very, very bright. Most raptors they're brown, or they're gray, or they're kind of mottled brown with tan and beige and white and whatever. But he's actually a pretty bright color. So this is the male, and the female is black and brown striped. Still pretty, but in a very different way, not quite so flashy. Oops, he's having a little bit of trouble pulling that little piece off of there. All right, so I mentioned what they like to eat. They eat a lot of birds and things like that. They're trying to catch things in the air. And to be able to catch another bird, he has to be faster. And so falcons, if you notice, if you take a peek at his wings, the tips are very pointy. That's the tip of his wing right here. His wingtips are very pointy. And if he opens up his wings, they go out and down to a point like an airplane wing. So that's a really fast shape. Now, he's not a big bird, so he isn't super fast like a peregrine falcon would be a lot faster. But they need that speed to be able to catch other birds. They also use really long, skinny toes. Hard to see because he's sort of busy holding things with his feet. But he has long, skinny toes that are good for grabbing the bird that he's trying to catch, to get past the feathers and get to the body. He has a notch on his beak. So in addition to the big curve, there's like a little triangular notch partway down that he can put on the neck of the prey that he catches and break its neck. So he makes sure it's dead and it can't get away. And then if you'll notice that kind of orangey area, well, he's really busy moving around. It's a little bit hard to see, but you can see above his beak, there's this little orangey area. There you go. And that's where his nostril is. So that's what he breathes through. And falcons have a little post in there called a near baffle that will deflect the air and kind of slow it down so they can breathe at a higher speed. And the other thing I want to point out to him, but he's busy bobbing his head. But you see the dark black stripe under his eyes. Yes, I know, I'm just pointing to your face. But you see the really dark stripe under there. We're going to talk a little bit. But that dark stripe helps him to see in bright light. So if you ever watch football or baseball or soccer, you see the players put that black stuff under their eye. It's to help absorb light so it doesn't bounce off of their skin and into their eye. And that's what those feathers do for falcons. And it looks different on different falcons. Peregrines have a really big splotch. What are you talking about? One of the things too, I was gonna see if he would do it, but he's too busy looking around. But sometimes you can get them to kind of hold their head still while their body is moving around. He's doing it a little bit. And that helps them when they're flying and when they're hanging out on a branch, because their body can get blown around by the wind, but they can keep their head still. And that means they can keep their eyes focused on whatever they're hunting, if they can keep their head still even when their body moves. So it helps with hunting. All right. This little guy, his name is Cricket for obvious reasons. One, he eats them, but also he sounds a little bit like a cricket sometimes. But his reason for being here is similar to Bubo. He was found by people when he was really young. And they tried to put him back in, tried to find help for him and then put him in the wild, but he was just determined to hang out around people. He'd already been around people too long. And so we would probably categorize him as a human imprint. He's just really just too used to being around people, and he didn't get that benefit of chatting. All right, are there any questions?
Yes, there is. Let me get back up to what is your favorite species of bird?
You know, we kind of tend to like, I mean, they all have their different things that you really like about them, and you end up really tending to like the ones that you work with the most, because you get to really get to know them. They have kind of personalities, for lack of a better word, for them. But I like all of them. I am kind of partial to owls, but I think they're all pretty amazing.
And you may have answered this. Why is the bird there? This bird?
I think I just mentioned that, but he's a human imprint. So people found him when he was really young. And I don't know if anybody saw him just rouse. He just fluffed up all his feathers and shook them down. I kind of mentioned that earlier.
Yes.
They do feeling comfortable, and it kind of dislodges old feathers and dust and things like that.
How many birds are currently at the center?
In education, we have 27, I think. But then in the clinic, which is a different area, those are birds that we hope to release to the wild that are being treated downstairs. And they're, I don't know the current number. Last time I saw it was like 35 or so. But in the busiest time of year, so the end of the summer into the fall, sometimes we have like 100 birds down in the clinic. And that gets a little bit crazy busy.
What, how many, see, are any of the birds picky eaters?
They can be a little bit. For the most part, you know, instinct tells them to eat when they have food. And so most of them are not going to be terribly particular about it. Definitely, if it's a bird eater, they tend to be a little more excited about eating a bird than if you give them like a chunk of rat or something like that. And so that can be a little bit true. And then some of them like organ meat and some don't. And, you know, some maybe aren't so fond of rat legs, and they can be a little bit particular, but usually what that tells us is that they're not very hungry and their weight is probably high, because if they were hungry, they would eat. They wouldn't really think about whether they liked it that much or not.
I didn't remember. What is his name?
His name is Cricket.
And where are the ears located?
It's similar. I mean, it's kind of harder to tell, but you see that his eye comes back like this, and then there's like a little dent right here. His ear is like right back behind his eye. And it isn't very visible on these guys. Their ears aren't particularly big. So you actually have to like fish around under the feathers to find the little hole.
Is he endangered, the species?
They're not endangered yet, but they are, their numbers are going down. That's one of the things that we've seen. We've seen fewer of them coming into the clinic over the last, like 5 to 10 years. And so we were kind of wondering a little bit. For a little while, we had a kestrel watch where we having people report where they saw them to kind of try to figure out what is causing their numbers to go down.
How do you know if a bird has been human imprinted, and what is the most endangered species at the center?
Yeah, so the human imprinting, usually we can tell, sometimes it's like from the story of the people who tell us what happened, but a lot of it is you can tell from their behavior. Because for one thing, all these little chirpy kind of noises he's making, he shouldn't really do that around people. That's a behavior that a youngster does around its parents. And then but one of the big things is that they'll start begging for food. They'll come over to you and they'll be squawking at you and they want you to give them something to eat. And that's very unnatural for a raptor to ask a human for food.
Has there ever been any snowy owls?
We do get some snowy owls. We don't have an education because unfortunately, I mean, this sounds crazy because this is Minnesota, but it actually is too warm here in the summertime for them. So we don't keep them in education because we'd have to like temperature control their area in order to have one here in the middle of the summer. But we do see one in the clinic. And actually, I just saw somebody earlier taking one out for flight to work its muscles to try to release it back to the wild. We don't get a large number of them. I mean, I would think like a handful a year, unless it's a year where we had an eruption where we had a clump of them come from the north down here to find food. And that happens sometimes in the winter, but I don't believe it happened this year.
And what food does this bird eat? The question.
He eats a lot of other birds. They eat things like sparrows. Sometimes people call this a sparrowhawk, even though it's a falcon. American kestrel is a small falcon, but sometimes their nickname is kind of a sparrowhawk because they eat birds that are typically like the size of a sparrow. But they will also take small mice and they'll eat like grain flies and grasshoppers.
This is me asking this one. Where would you find a falcon typically hanging out?
So these birds, a lot of times, they like to hunt more in fields. And so like, I said, like if you drive out on a road that's out of the city a little ways and there's like a telephone wire next to a field, that's actually one of the best places to find them.
Okay.
But they're not completely specific to that. I mean, they definitely, they're not as likely to be like in a wooded area. They tend to like it a little bit more open there, but there can be trees. They want trees around to nest in and to roost in. But like I said, I live in a suburb of Minneapolis and they're in my neighborhood. And it's just, they just need to be able to find like a tree with a hole in it to nest in because they like to nest in a cavity. And they need to find birdseed. And so sometimes neighborhoods can even be good for them because people put out birdseed for the little birds. That kind of draws them into the area. So
Super. And we've had just a couple of people that have dropped off. And so I think maybe some of the questions are slowing down. So I'm gonna let you keep going.
all right, so I have one more bird.
Great.
Put away. All right, he's in there pinning up his food and chatting a little bit. So like I said, a lot of times people don't even think about those really little birds, but he is definitely a raptor. And everybody is likely going to recognize this one. Second. So this bird hasn't done a lot of online programs, so I'm just going to stand here and let him get a little used to staring at himself on the screen before I get him any closer than this. Obviously, this is a bald eagle. And I always like to ask people if he's bald and they laugh and say no, because we think of bald as being without hair. But in an old version of English, bald could mean white. And so that's what bald eagles were named for. And of course, we don't use the word that way anymore, but we still call them a bald eagle. And if you've ever seen them in nesting out in the wild or watch the nest cams, you know that the youngsters look different. Obviously, they're like downy gray when they're really little, but even once they grow in their big feathers, that first year of life, they're pretty much dark all over. Brown head, brown tail, brown eyes, black beak, and that brown body. So they look really very different when they're in their first year of life. But it takes them a number of years to turn into this adult bald eagle with the white head and white tail. They typically drop out some brownish feathers every year and they grow in some with a little more white and a little more white and a little more white. So it can take them 5 to 8 years before they have before they're considered an adult and they have this white head and white tail. And they can vary a little bit. Some of them, he's like Gladdy here. This bird, his name is Gladdy. And he's not a really crisp white. Some of them are very crisp white. Some of them are kind of in between. He's kind of ivory almost. And then we have one who's still like a little bit of a muddy brown and some spots. So they can really vary and you can actually tell them apart if you get kind of used to recognizing them. But their nests, if you ever watched their nests, start out, yay big around, right? I mean, they tend to come back and they keep adding sticks to it, making it bigger and bigger. One of the reasons they need a big nest is an eagle egg will fit into my hand, cup like this. But by the time they're 3 months old, they're this big. These birds all grow up really fast because they don't want to grow in feathers and then get bigger. So they grow full size, then they grow in those flight feathers and the body feathers, and then they learn how to fly and they leave the nest. So usually you need a pretty big nest to hold what is potentially, you know, 1 or 2 adults and like 1 or 2 babies that are in there in that nest. So biggest one I ever heard of was somewhere along the lines of like 9 feet wide, you know, more than 10 feet, like probably close to 20 feet deep, and it weighed like 2 tons. So there was one in the news recently here in Minnesota that it fell down because it got so heavy that, and it was unstable on the tree, and it came out. And that's what sometimes will happen. Their nest will get so big that they just can't, the tree can't kind of hold them up anymore. So they like to eat a lot of fish. We see them around lakes and rivers. We have a lot of them in Minnesota. I think Iowa might have a pretty decent number, although I didn't look at the recent count. But you'll find them a lot more in the, of course, these states that have a lot of water around and not so much in something like Arizona, for example. I know in Minnesota here, for a while, we had the highest nesting population of eagles in the lower 48 states. So I'm going to see if I can get it a little bit closer. This is a male bald eagle. So remember, females are bigger than males. And so he's not particularly big for a bald eagle. In the winter, he usually weighs like 8 pounds. So about as much as a gallon of milk, and a little bit lighter in the summertime. And the females that we have around here, typically more like 10, 11 pounds. We have one who's a little bit bigger. If you go to further north, they tend to get a little bit bigger than they do further south. So in Iowa, yours might be just a little bit smaller than they would be here in Minnesota. But we have a female here that she likes to be more like 11 or 12. So a little bit heavier in the winter time.
I'm not sure what the name was.
Oh, his name is Gladdy, which
Okay.
is kind of odd. It's not like he's happy or anything like that. He was named, it's a male eagle, but he was named after a woman named Gladys. And so they're just trying to turn it into like a boyish sounding name. So his name's Gladdy, and he doesn't know that. So it's really,
Do they swallow their food whole?
they can. So if he gets something small enough, he'll take it down whole. Like sometimes he'll take down pretty big rat chunks whole. A fish would be probably pretty hard to take down whole unless it was a really small fish, which is not what they really want to catch. They do eat a lot of fish, but they're mostly going to have to catch something that's, you know, like foot size. They don't want anything really huge for the most part, because they can't carry something that weighs more than like half of their body weight. Think about if you tried to double your weight and you tried to fly, that's a lot of extra weight to carry. So typically they're looking for that little bit smaller fish. Although if you look online, there's one that I really like. It was an eagle on the St. Croix River that caught something that was just massive. And it had to actually paddle to shore. Like it was like in the water, and it was like rowing with its wings to try to get the fish to the shore because it couldn't pick it up and carry it. So that's not particularly common. They really want to carry things that are a little bit smaller.
Has anyone ever brought in eggs that were not hatched yet?
Not usually. I don't know that we get a lot of that, and we don't do anything with them. So really they need to go with their parents. We do sometimes get really fluffy little things that have just come out of the nest, that potentially their nest is down or their parents are gone. And then we can sometimes foster them out to other adult birds and let them raise them. But
How have you ever been attacked by a bird?
no, in particular, our education birds are trained. So, you know, they're not naturally comfortable with people, right? We have to like teach them that we're safe and that we provide them with food. And so our birds don't get anything out of coming at us. We're not going to give them a reward. We're not going to give them food for doing that. And so they don't have any incentive to do that. And if, you know, we treat them really well, we make sure that they're comfortable and their needs are taken care of. And if they want the day off, they get to take the day off. Even mental health days, whenever they need.
Have they? Have you ever had a bird with a hurt beak at the center? And then if yes, how would they eat?
The only one that I know of, I don't see as many clinic birds as I do the education birds, and we probably wouldn't have a bird like that in education. We did have one in the clinic that had, they kind of called it a scissor beak, where it was off center a bit. But the bird was able to eat, and that's what it would need to be able to do. That it couldn't survive if it wasn't able to function and use its beak to tear things up.
Why is Vlad at the center?
Gladdy, so if you notice, you see the wing on this side, that's the natural position for an eagle wing. You can see that the wrist is kind of up at the top. And then if you look at this wing, you can see how it's hanging down really low. I'm glad he had a collision injury, which is very common. We get a lot of birds that get hit by cars, fly into things, hit power lines, hit windows. And so his flight is very poor. Think about him trying to fly down to a lake and grab a fish out of it. He wouldn't be able to sustain that kind of flight. So that's why he's here. And he's about 27 years old. In the wild, 20 to 25 would be pretty old for an eagle if they survive their first year, which is the hard thing. But he hopefully will stay here for longer. They can, here they have really good healthcare. So if they get sick, they go downstairs, and obviously they can't get hit by cars, and they're getting a good food source. And we give him a chunk.
And now that he just spread his wings, what is the wingspan of an eagle?
Usually it's around 6 or 7 feet. I don't know that we've measured his specifically, but the male is probably more like 6 feet around here, and then the female might be closer to 7, like 6.5 to 7. If you go up to Alaska, their eagles up there are bigger. They have their females there could be like 15 or 16 pounds. So I'm guessing their wingspan is probably easily 7 feet. All right.
Wow.
You can see him tearing off these chunks.
Yes.
And he's having rat today. We don't always have fish for him, and he's not particularly particular about the food he gets. He likes rat just fine. He also likes chicken. Sometimes we get chicken. But you can see him holding it under his toes and then using his beak. Sorry, I hope no one's eating lunch up.
How often do you feed them?
So our bigger birds, more often than not, they eat once a day. And that's actually a luxury, because in the wild, oops, just went on screen. In the wild, they may not even eat every day if they don't catch something. So being fed once a day is actually a pretty good treat. Smaller birds, we tend to try to give them at least 2 meals a day, because it's a bigger deal for the small bird to go without something to eat for a longer period of time. But it also depends what we're doing with them that day. Like Laddie ate his food spread across 2 meals today, because I did 2 programs. I had an offsite program earlier. And so he's just got split up a little bit. And so sometimes they get the day off and they just get their food tossed in the enclosure for him, and they just get to eat the whole thing at once.
I have a picture that I've taken of an eagle recently, and they went down by the lock and dam where the fish get churned up, and grabbed the fish, and he started eating it while he was flying.
Yeah.
Is that typical, or?
That's pretty cool. It's I don't know that it's common, but they're capable of doing it, obviously.
Yeah.
We hear it more for falcons, like peregrine falcons are known for doing that in flight, to start eating while they're flying. They're more likely to go someplace so they can stand and eat it, but yeah, they can certainly do it. He's staring at the poor kestrel in the crate behind me.
We've got about 3 minutes. I believe it was 2:35, Ken, that we had scheduled it for, so.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. All right, are you done looking over there? All right, so things I want to mention about eagles too is that they used to be endangered. We haven't talked about this, right? But they used to be endangered, and we were pretty worried they would disappear. People used to shoot them on sight and like having them around, that they would compete with people for fish. We also used some chemicals on our crops after World War II, something called DDT, that we sprayed on the crops to kill insects, and it did a really good job of that, but it would get into the eagles when it would get into the water and into fish. And so they ended up with a lot of that chemical in their body, and it affected how they use calcium. So when they laid eggs, the shells were really thin, and they would sit on them to warm them, and they would just crack. So the big thing we want to know is that it just affected how they were able to produce young. And because of that, their numbers started dwindling. So it didn't do anything to the adult birds, but they stopped producing young in this part of the country in particular. And so I'm going to put him away, it's starting a little heavy, but
How do you communicate with them? I mean, did they hear your voice and listen, or how do you get them to do things? So.
all right. So a lot of the signals that we use for them, we sometimes say things to them. I don't know for sure that words are the most common thing for them, because of course they don't speak our language, right? But we sometimes do associate words with the things that we do, like we say step up. But for the most part, what we do with the birds, there's a lot of visual cues for things. So if I want him to step onto the glove, I slide the glove in, put it in front of his feet. And if it's higher than what he's standing on, then he knows he's supposed to get on it. And so he'll get on that and he'll get rewarded for it. And if we want him to hop like onto a scale or a different perch in his enclosure, we'll tap it. We'll say, just ask him to go over there, and then he knows that means he's supposed to come over there and he'll get rewarded for it, so. So most of the time, it's a lot of visual communication and then a system of rewards. So we do something called positive reinforcement. Just like clicker training a dog, if you've ever trained a dog and you tell the dog to sit and it does it, it gets a treat. You may make a clicking sound and then give it a treat. And we do a very similar thing with Raptors. You do what we like, we give you a piece of food for it. It works really well for them. I do want to finish with the Eagles. Like I said, we did do some really terrible things to them, but we also banned that DDT chemical. We protected all the places that bald eagles like to live. And they made a really good recovery. I mean, when I was younger, we won't talk about my age, but I hardly ever saw a bald eagle. It was very rare to see them. And now, like, anytime I ask somebody if they've seen a bald eagle in the wild, they say yes. So they've really made a good recovery, and that's because of us. We did bad things to them, but we also did really good things, and we helped save them. So we kind of have that power and the choice to decide if we want to do good or do bad for the animals out in the wild. All right, any last questions?
Some of the classes are slowly jumping off, but we still got 20 folks there right now still. And I'm just seeing thank yous and goodbyes. I'm not seeing any more questions for you.
All right, well, thank you so much for having us do this program. We appreciate it. And the education we do help support our work here in the clinic as well. So you're helping save some birds.
Thank you very much, Kelly.
Thank you, bye.
And I have recorded this, so what I'll make sure Ken has the recording, is able to share it.
All right, thank you.
All right,
Bye.
take care. I'm going to be shutting everything down in just a minute. So.
Okay.